To say that the Vivo V30 Pro boasts exciting camera specs is pretty spot on. It doesn't have just one or two 50-megapixel shooters, no, it actually has a total of 4 all around. And not to mention, it also has Aura Light 3.0, which is pretty hard to miss because it's big and it's bright. Point being, with all the photography-centric features of the Vivo V30 Pro, it felt like a camera review was in order. Hey guys, it's Vika, and you're with The Modern Creatures. On paper, the Vivo V30 Pro shows off quite an impressive setup with not one, but 3 megapixel shooters for its main, telephoto, and ultra-wide. The telephoto lens, armed with its 2x optical zoom, promises that bokeh that you'd want for portrait shots. And encircling these lenses is the Aura Light 3.0, a dual temperature LED flash that's, well, really bright. And all of the V30 Pro's cameras benefit from autofocus. Moving on, you've got the usual modes, but the V30 Pro does offer more photography-centric features like bracketing, interval timers, and more. In portrait mode, you can also access those Zeiss-style portraits, which simulate the bokeh effects of various Zeiss lenses. More on that later, but feel free to skip ahead to the portrait section of this video if you want to know more. For a video, you can record up to 4K 30 FPS for all of its cameras, and you can go even further up to 60 FPS when using the wide and main cameras. The Vivo V30 Pro's cameras overall are very good. There are some weaknesses which we'll detail in a little bit, but for the most part, photos come out clean, detailed, and sharp. The main camera's Sony IMX920 sensor paired with Vivo's VCS True Color is able to produce photos with punchy colors and visible detail. Post-processing is subtle enough, though over-sharpening does occasionally happen, especially during busier photos. As mentioned earlier, the telephoto camera offers up to 2x zoom, but also has a toggle up to 4x. Though photos aren't always clear at this range, you're getting good background compression as well, which you can clearly see when switching lenses. And finally, for that ultra-wide, while it also has a 50-megapixel shooter, I would say it would have to be the weakest among the three, with photos coming out with softer details and a little less saturation. There is a bit of evident distortion, though not distracting. The ultra-wide also doubles as a macro shooter, and it's surprisingly good. In my time shooting with the V30 Pro, I did notice that it kind of struggled when shooting high-contrast scenes, like when shooting against the bright sky, for example, or generally any environment that needs more dynamic range so you can get those details in the shadows and the highlights. What I ended up doing was shooting in RAW, or rather, I ended up shooting in Pro mode so I could get access to the RAW format. So when I do go into my post-processing software later, I can save those details in the highlights and shadows that would otherwise be lost. Another thing that I noticed with the V30 Pro, or maybe this is true for Vivo phones in general, is that the post-processing tends to focus on the face. Now this is fine, and the problem though is that with the limited dynamic range on this phone, or at least from what I've observed, is that it does now have a harder time balancing when things are a little high contrast, as I said earlier. The result is that you will notice noise and grain and other artifacts like that, even when it's a well-lit photo. In low light, the V30 Pro still performs really well, keeping even small details pretty clear. In more extreme lighting situations, you may have to sit still for a second or two, but with dual stabilization on board, it's not really that hard to get a good shot. And all else, in the darkest of darks, there is that Aura Light. Now, one of the weaknesses of the V30 Pro is the obvious shift in quality and color when switching between lenses. When you do start getting in between those focal lengths, or basically just using digital zoom, it does get a little bit iffy and the quality does drop down. So my suggestion, at least this is from what I've noticed, is that you stick to the preset zoom toggles that you have. That's the 1x, the 2x, and the 4x, because it seems both the software and the hardware are very well optimized for those focal lengths. But overall, without individually dissecting each lens and feature, the V30 Pro's camera system is a competent one as a whole and should perform well in the hands of both casual and professional shooters. As I've been saying and as we've been seeing, portraits are still the trend this year. We've seen phones like the Huawei P60 Pro that, while not exclusively marketed for portraits, had one of my favorite telephoto shooters. And then there's also the Reno 11 Pro that really focused on portraits with the in-sensor zoom and its portrait-specific algorithm.
And Vivo's got their own in the form of Zeiss portrait styles. There are 6 bokeh choices available, and the results can be quite gorgeous given you have the right background.
In truth, however, I did have many attempts with the Zeiss style portraits trying to get a clear-cut difference. Unfortunately, it only really works if you have the right background. Now, what does that mean? Backgrounds that emit good shine or have good texture, or basically anything that would look good once it starts to defocus.
When shooting in portrait mode, you can also adjust the level of bokeh and point of focus after you take the photo. This is really useful because the default is usually set too low, which makes the blur look too artificial. Apart from its triple 50 megapixel shooters, Vivo also included a huge dual temperature LED flash that's a little bit smart too. Apart from lining up your face, which it does effectively, might I add, it can also sense the distance and colors within the scene and adjust to the best settings. Vivo says it's 19 times larger and 50 times softer than your regular flash. Now, before I switch over the video, let's quickly talk about that front-facing camera. A high megapixel shooter and something Vivo is pretty good at, the front-facing camera outs sharp and clear photos as well.
If you don't feel the need to take those Zeiss portrait shots or take advantage of the telephoto lens, the front-facing camera is more than enough for taking those selfies. Leave it to Vivo to have one of the best selfie cameras around. Definitely good enough for TikTok, definitely good enough for Instagram.
For video, I have to say I'm pretty pleased with the V30 Pro, and among the phones that I've tried recently, I think it's one of my favorites. Stabilization is available up to 4K and is automatically enabled, so you don't really have to worry about shaky footage at all. It's quite consistent too in delivering that stable footage, though a few shakes here and there are inevitable.
This isn't a big deal, and it's probably not something a lot of people look for, but it's something that I've noticed because often light flares on phones are ugly, but with the Vivo V30 Pro, it has that Zeiss coating, and it's so evident when you see the flare from the sunset. It's just gorgeous. Small things that I really appreciate. So I've already tried a couple of portrait phones in the last couple of months, and it's still really interesting to me how they're different in one way or another. With the Vivo V30 Pro, I found it's really about looking your best and getting those glam portraits with little to no effort. You've got 3 50 megapixel cameras on the rear and another 50 megapixel camera up in front, meaning you've got dependability all around. Couple that with Vivo's face-centric post-processing and other behind-the-scenes tech things, you've got a phone that can easily make you look gorgeous in almost any scenario. Or maybe it's just as simple as a great phone for taking photos at night.
On the technical side of things, it would probably be hard to find another phone that would match the specs of the V30 Pro, but performance-wise, you do have a few alternatives.
If your eyes are on Vivo, however, there is a lot to love about this phone beyond its cameras. It's got a pretty great display, capable processor, and long-lasting battery. And all that is wrapped up in a very thin, light, and gorgeous IP54 rated body. So if all those sound good to you, then yes, maybe the Vivo V30 Pro is for you. So that's the Vivo V30 camera review. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and well, I'm just here to say, just dropping by. If you guys want to help us grow, subscribe to the channel, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, and all the social media platforms you can think of, I guess. If we're not on it, invite us, things like that. Yeah. Once again, it's Vika, and I'll see you in the next video.